Hello and welcome back to the Trusted Podcast. This week, we sit down with Rohit, founder of Saturn.
We took a deep dive into AI and how it's revolutionising our industry, as well as looking at Rohit's founder's story.
It's a really interesting conversation. You're going to love it. Sit back, grab a cuppa, and get ready for the content.
Rohit, a very warm welcome to the Trusted Podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Back up in the Northwest as well, where you grew up.
Yeah, it's, it was my birthday on Friday, so I got to spend some time with my parents and my sister, and lots of family. And yeah, I've got to see some firms as well up here. I'm actually going to see a firm after this, so it's great to be back.
Yeah, no, definitely. How often do you come back up now to see family?
Probably every 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
It's been less frequent since we started the company.
Yeah.
I used to try and make it once a month, but it's fine. I think my folks are understanding. It's pretty busy.
It's a bit easier when you can tie in firm meetings with it as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a good excuse. Although I don't tell my folks that, but yeah, it's great. And we've got a whole host of firms up in the north as well. So it's great to be able to spend some time with them.
Brilliant. Why don't we start? What problem was that bad in financial services that pushed you to start Saturn as a business? What is it that you're trying to solve?
So since I was 13, when I was 13, the global financial crisis happened. And I read a book by Vince Cable that basically talked about how the economics of debt and all of the kind of root causes that led up to the financial crisis. And that got me as a weird 13-year-old very interested in how much of an impact financial services, the economy and those sorts of things can have on people. Because if you remember, the kind of energy at the time was pretty low. People were struggling or people were worried. And I think all of that was driven by the financial service sector and broadly the economy. So I then thought that I wanted to go into investment banking because that's the kind of only sexy career that exists in financial services when you're 15, 16. But I very quickly realized that wasn't for me. Instead, I went to university, studied economics and went into investment management. So I worked at BNY for 4.5 years. And while I was there, a lot of the problems that you see today, young people not investing, you see people who are investing getting scammed, you see them not getting the right advice, not knowing where to look for information. All of those problems were directly visible to me when I was at BNY Mellon. And actually when I was 23, I tried to start my first company, which the premise of that was basically 20-somethings do not know where to look for investment information, but they should start investing. And typically the things they should be investing in are 100% equity portfolios, for example, because they've got a long time to run until they retire. When we started that, the regulator basically took this approach that retail investors should not be investing in direct equity. They should be investing in funds. I think the regulator taking that stance is slightly weird. I think people should be able to decide what they invest in for themselves. And then in 2020, you had the kind of Wall Street Bets, GameStop, AMC fiasco. And basically I felt a little bit smug, but smugness doesn't get you to solve a problem. It's ultimately just an ego boost. So kind of smug that the regulator had decided to go down a specific way and we were proven right. But that didn't enable me to build a company. So that was 23, then 26, looked into the risk profiling sector again to try to alleviate some of the problems that exist around kind of very rigid risk profiles. Ultimately, everyone has a different risk profile when they wake up on a different morning, right? That's the way that people behave. Behavior is something that you can't necessarily forecast over a daily basis. It's something that you have to look at trends and you have to look at information. But again, I felt that the industry in risk profiling is pretty locked in. Advisors don't move their risk profiles every day. It's not something that you can kind of directly go for. But advisors have long struggled with the admin and compliance burden that exists. And I think the reason advisors as an entry point into financial advice and scaling advice is so attractive is because they have a huge amount of trust with their clients. They are the trusted authority on financial decisions for their clients for 15, 20, 25 years. And it's a pretty hidden industry. If you aren't in the industry, no one really talks about financial advisors. Everyone views financial advisors, if they do talk about them, as salespeople.
Yep.
But actually, they're providing peace of mind. They are almost like a therapist for your money, or they're a GP, someone that you go to when you need to make certain decisions. And the industry right now is pretty small relative to what it should be. 90 million people around the world receive ongoing financial advice. If you compare that to the medical industry, for example, 4 billion people around the world receive ongoing medical advice. I would put financial advice and medical advice pretty close to each other in terms of importance. So for us, it was, what are the symptoms, or what are the root causes of that problem? Why aren't there a billion people around the world receiving advice? And ultimately, it comes down to workflows, processes. It comes down to trust. It comes down to marketing, branding, scaling, all of these things that exist as problems that are ready to be solved across the world. So that was the kind of impetus, really, to start Saturn.
So it's make advice easier for advisors and allow that gap to, I guess, be closed.
Yeah, make human-led financial advice scalable. And our mission from the beginning has been enable a billion people around the world to receive financial peace of mind. I think right now, financial advisors are the only authority that gives that true financial peace of mind through cash flow planning, through their investment decisions, but ultimately being someone who can be a consultant. Hey, I need to send my kids to school, or I need to pay for this healthcare for my parents. Who am I going to go to first? I'm going to go to my advisor.
Yeah.
And how do we scale those moments? How do we ensure that families who previously have not accessed the information and the expertise that advisors have are now able to access them?
And why the name Saturn? You know, what's the philosophy behind that?
Was there a different name beforehand?
There was a different name that I'm not going to talk about publicly. Amal, if you're listening to this, yes, it's not going to come out ever again.
Don't give it the airtime.
But so we started working together, me and Amal, on Saturn around July 2023. And at the time, obviously, you know what it's like when you have to come up with a name, whether it's for a baby or a product or whatever it is, that you can't think of any good names. The only good names that come to mind are very cheesy ones or pretty rubbish ones. So we kind of said, look, let's not focus on the name right now. Let's focus on the product. Let's focus on getting information around where advisors really struggle in their workflow. And in the WeWork building that we've called home for the last 2.5 years, we're basically going down the lift, and it had one of these old TV screens, like the kind of 1.5 inch, 2-inch monitors, really small. And it just said, NASA discovers it rains diamonds on Saturn. And obviously Saturn is the Roman god of wealth and agriculture. Saturn is also a very interesting planet as a planet from, like, I was very interested in solar system growing up, and like Saturn is a very interesting planet. And then the name Saturn almost doesn't necessarily relate to anything. Like, it's not specifically financial services. It's very generic. It kind of gives you a lot of scope for brand and kind of imagery and those sorts of things. So we sat with it for, I think it was probably about 30 minutes, and we went, yeah, cool, let's go. It was Saturn. And it just felt right. You kind of have a feeling in your gut when something is right, and yeah, Saturn was it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it's kind of coinciding with space, because you have been on a meteoric rise since the business has started as well, hasn't it? So kind of going back to some of the early days, what's the hardest decision that you've had to make as a founder of a business in that kind of early setting of setting the business up?
I don't know. There were a few kind of intentional decisions that we took. We always wanted to have human, like we went self-serve when it came to onboarding clients. We always want that human experience, because I think the interesting thing about this industry is that technology providers historically have let advisors down a lot, in the sense of they promise the earth, but they don't solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we recently had a client come to us from another provider, and they said they're able to do these tools, they're able to build the tools, but they're not solving my workflow problems.
Yep.
And that, I think, is driven by the human experience. A human can basically sit down, let's say, for example, you were running a financial advice business. I could have, or one of the team would have, half an hour to 45-minute conversation with you to understand where the business is struggling, why it's struggling, what you've tried to fix historically, what tools have you used, what different processes have you used, who are the different stakeholders involved. There's so much complexity in a business that you can't abstract that to just giving people access to a tool and expecting them to use it. Yeah. It's almost like financial advice. It's almost, yes, I could make my own financial decisions. I probably got a big enough ego to say, yeah, I can make better financial decisions than advisor A or B. Yeah. But it's not the kind of utility. It's not the investment return that you go to an advisor for. It's actually the more behavioral aspects, the trusted aspect. And that's exactly the decision that we took from early on, that we need to be a trusted transformation partner for our clients. And I think it's been pretty difficult to scale that. That's one of the learnings that we've had, but we very much stand by that decision. And that was probably a difficult decision to make at that time, because the kind of hunch or the gut feel is to go, how do we get mass market? How do we go as quickly as possible and get everyone on board? And I think the opposite is, how do we do a few small relationships incredibly well, create that kind of word of mouth feeling, and then accelerate from there. And we've accelerated and we've made some mistakes along the way, but I think that human-led approach is one of the kind of pivotal decisions we took in the beginning.
Brilliant. It's really interesting you say that about, obviously naming no names, advisor had been to another firm, just felt like they were getting a generic kind of set of tools. Where is AI creating the most value at the minute versus what is kind of seen as hype in that space? Obviously, you've said you're trying to create that workflow piece rather than just, here's a set number of tools that do X, Y, and Z, but don't kind of fit in for the full process. Yeah.
I think, honestly, we have been through and are currently living through a revolution of how we work. I will not sugarcoat it in any way. I think anyone who's used the generic tools like your ChatGPTs, etc., knows that they are working very differently now than what they were 3 years ago. But the problem is at an organizational scale, whether you're a 3, 4, 30, 300 person business, that coordination between different people who do different tasks or roles and responsibilities is not solved by more tools. It's actually solved by, how do I kind of change the way that I work in order to adapt and adopt these tools? And the way that we think about it is, AI is going to be able to take, in its purest form, unstructured data and put a structure around it, or manipulate it in some way that enables you to get an output. If I take, for example, a suitability report, that's obviously one of the big surface level pain points that advisors have. And I'd love to dig into kind of actually the root cause of the suitability problem, because it's not writing reports. But ultimately, the way that we see it is, the suitability report is an amalgamation of lots of different data sources, whether that be provider feeds, performance, client fact find, some of the more nuanced conversations, emails, messages, text messages, whatever it is, could combine in terms of data sources to be able to produce that suitability report. For me to be able to say to you that this investment is the right decision for you to take because your goal is to have 100K in this pot of savings by the time you're 70, let's say. But in reality, the tools are not going to solve how do I gather all of those bits of information? How do I hand that over to my paraplanner? How does a paraplanner interpret that information without making any mistakes? Or how do they then go back and forth with the advisor or the financial planner to say, hey, I think you're making the wrong decision for this client because there's this other bit of information over here that you haven't considered. AI doesn't solve those things. AI just makes the stuff that was mundane, that structuring of data or the manipulation of data, much faster. Ultimately, what we need to do is actually think about, how do we remodel the organization to be able to adapt these tools? And that's what currently firms are struggling with. Like, a lot of the kind of ROI discussions around whether AI is valuable or not are often constrained by how much have you kind of just stuck AI on top of what you always did, or have you changed the way that you work to be able to get the best from the systems? And that's a big question. I don't think we've got the silver bullet. I think because firms are all coming at it from different angles. So all firms operate differently right now. It would be stupid of me to say, actually, all firms tomorrow will operate the same way. No, all firms will always operate differently. It's just how differently. It's also, what are the things that they want to be different at? Where do they want to be more standardized? These are conversations that advisors and directors have typically not had. They buy a piece of technology, they put it into a process because they think it's going to solve this problem. But actually what they don't realize, because they don't have the time ultimately. They're so busy and just ready to do the work. They need to see clients. So what we need to do is to create that space for them to have those discussions around, what is it that you want your organization to look like? What do you want your client experience to look like? Let's work backwards from that and design a process that optimizes for it.
Couldn't agree more on that. We've when we've been on the road at Timeline, we've done loads of different work around that, and you tend to find firms will just buy lots and lots of pieces of tech for different things, but it adds so much complexity to the business, particularly from an integration perspective as well. Because if you have 2 pieces of tech, they just need to integrate back and forth. But if you've got 7, they all need to speak to each other, and it looks like this, and it just makes things so complex.
I think you're completely right when you say we're living in a revolution, and if your motto where 1 billion people getting financial advice is true, which I think it should be, something needs to change, right? What would you say to the naysayers in these conversations, the firms that perhaps some that don't believe it, this AI revolution and that something needs to change, and others that are scared of it, that are worried that jobs will be replaced and that human connection will be lost? What's your overriding message for them?
So I think I'll go for the naysayers first. I think in any technology revolution, there's always naysayers. And ultimately, the reason they're naysayers is because they expect something more. And so if you look at like any technological revolution, you have a normal distribution of people. You've got the early adopters, you've got the kind of middle ground, which is basically people who will see a friend or someone on Twitter or someone on LinkedIn posting about something. They're like, oh, that's interesting. And then they'll start to use it, and then they'll start to feel like, wow, this is pretty cool. Yeah. And on the far end, you're always going to have people who say, yeah, this is not up to the standard because it makes one mistake. Yeah. I think to those people, I would say you should start to use it for certain tasks that right now require you to gather a lot of information. So there's a few tools out there that basically will, and you don't have to be in financial advice to use them, that will basically take all of your information, whether it's from email, your calendar, etc., and give you daily morning briefs about the meetings you've got coming up. I don't use those tools because for me, I use AI in other areas. But for example, a lot of our team do use those tools in order to prep for meetings, in order to look at information and make sure that they go into the day knowing what's coming up. Those are just simple tools that today you might hire an EA, an exec assistant, to do that for you, or you might do it yourself. You might allocate an hour of time in the morning to prep for the day with your coffee or with your breakfast sandwich. But ultimately, AI can do that because it's a lot of consolidation of information and synthesizing, and you can basically personalize it to yourself. So I would say to the naysayers, look, it's fair enough that you have very high standards. Just keep trying different tools because at some point it will open your eyes to the power of the technology that exists.
Yeah.
To those that are fearful, I would say every technological revolution in some way changes the way that labor markets are structured. But I would say that the most fearful people that I've heard in the industry, power planners, admins, etc., they actually will become more valuable. So power planners, the reason I think they're going to become more valuable is their technical insight around financial products, around interpreting client information and the financial products that go with them will be much more valuable to clients. So I was in with a board of a big consolidator last week, and that's one of the things I said to them, that power planners should actually start to go into your client meetings again, not to be note takers or anything like that, because AI can do that, but actually to represent the technical authority that the financial advice business is able to provide. The advisor is the trusted authority, the relationship person, the person who is going to be on the phone to them at 10 p.m. when their mum's been kind of put into hospital or whatever it is. That's the financial advisor's relationship. But the power planner's relationship should be, how can I make sure that I'm taking all of the information that I need from this client to understand that this advice is suitable or not? And then the systems will be able to do the work around compliance. They'll be able to do the work around drafting the reports, but the power planner will have a much more nuanced understanding of what that client needs and what is right for that client. In terms of admins, I see that role being, again, much more client facing. I think our old model of operating in financial advice, where the advisor is the only one that goes and sees the client, and basically you have 2 people, 2.2 is the UK average, support 2 advisors, who just sit in the background and basically move data from A to B, interpret data, put data into a template. Those days are going to be gone for sure. But I think what we should start to look at is, how do we train these younger people to be either incredibly more technical, i.e. deep understanding of cash flow, deep understanding of different scenarios of what looks good and what doesn't look good, or how do we train these younger people to become advisors? last week, the FCA published a paper that the average age of an advisor has come down from 59 to somewhere in their 40s. That's pretty crazy that over the last year, there's been such a rapid change in the demographics. And that's not led to like a massive decrease in number of advisors, by the way. There's obviously some that have retired. There's some new blood that's come into the industry, but the industry's getting younger. The industry, therefore, is going to need newer tools to be able to adapt to the younger way of doing things. And not saying it's right or wrong, but that's just typically what happens. And I think the things that, as things get abundant and cheap, so data transformation, moving data from A to B, that's becoming abundant and cheap. Something else is going to become scarce and incredibly valuable. And I think that human trust, human relationship, that technical expertise is the thing that's going to become hugely more valuable as we move forward.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. On an off topic, I was watching something a couple of weeks ago, which was an interview regarding ethics in AI, and not specific to Saturn, but this is an example I want to give, and it'd be good to get your answer from a financial services perspective. So when the Ukraine and Russia war kicked off, obviously the Ukrainians have done a good job in terms of kind of numbers. There was an AI company which was massively assisting the Ukrainians with kind of satellite data overview, logistical stuff, different things like that to kind of help them out. And that was the question to the gent who founded that business. It was, you've got a tech-based business, but obviously now it's involved with human lives to that extent. How in financial services do we make sure we harness AI and kind of control it? And what do you think it shouldn't decide in finance? How far do you think it should go?
Yeah, it's a great question. I believe, and as a company, we believe that human-led financial advice is the future.
Yeah,
we don't want fully AI-driven advice. Yep. I'm not saying that wouldn't be valuable for someone with 20K to invest, for example. It probably would. But at certain points in time, you're going to want a human authority to be the person who helps you determine how much money you need for your kids to go to school and things like that. So your question around where should AI get involved and where shouldn't it? I think AI as an augmenter, as a kind of almost look at it as a 24-hour teammate in some ways, that can give you the information you need that you probably forgot about, that can enable you to do things that before you would have had, either you would have done them yourself, now you're freed up to be able to do more different things. The example I would give is Starbucks, $112 billion revenue company. Everyone knows them. They, from 2018 to 2024, because they're public, they have to publish this. They started to invest heavily in AI systems that were going to be front of house. And what they found was there was a massive decline in the number of people that spent any amount of time in the coffee shops. So with AI-driven coffee baristas, let's say, people would walk in, get the coffee and walk out. With a human barista, people are more likely to spend more time sat in the coffee shop.
And get that second coffee.
And get the second coffee. Obviously, they do it from a cash perspective, right? But I think the reason a human being pays for something is because they ascribe some value to it. Yeah. So the reason you buy those two coffees is because you think there's some value to the two coffees. And when I was reading that paper, probably not that long ago, last week or something, it made me understand, or it gave me a different lens on what is financial advice. Yeah. Financial advice is the very, very kind of trusted, craft-based, relationship-driven thing that AI is not going to replace. I remember when there was a company out in the US called Hazel, where they launched their AI tax planning solution, part of a platform called Altruist. And SJP stock, AJ Bell stock, Hargreaves Lansdowne, all of them crashed. And especially the ones who are doing human-led financial advice, for me, the stocks crashing there was a misinterpretation of the market in terms of what the value is. If you look at the value as only being investments, well then, yeah, it makes sense that you think it's going to be commoditized. Okay. But for the last 20 years, advisors have been listening to narratives that they're going to get automated, whether it's robo, whether it's trading platforms, whatever it is. There's always been a narrative that every new technological epoch will lead to the death of advisors. Instead, they stay resilient. 9 trillion worth of assets around the world sit with advisors. That's the most in any one kind of segment within financial services. You aren't going to get rid of advisors. That's the truth. And that's not what we're here for. We're here to scale the amount of work and clients and assets that an advisor can service. And what that means is the AI is going to be an assistant. The AI is going to be a challenger, a teammate to the advisor to ensure that that end client gets the service and the experience that they need.
Yeah. I think from the firms we work with, from my perspective, firms are adapting quite well, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I touched on there playing devil's advocate for the people that don't believe or the people that are scared. I generally see that most advisors are at least trying. And I think that's the biggest step, isn't it? From my big takeaway from this has been just start. You know, it doesn't matter whether that's using Claude or ChatGPT, but you will quickly find yourself behind. When we look at the next 10 years in financial services as a whole, what's going to separate the firms that are at the forefront of this revolution compared to those that are sleepwalking?
So I think there's a number of risks, right, that just using AI poses. And I think as you try things, you'll start to kind of scratch the surface and uncover those risks. I think those that will thrive, as you talk about, and be able to scale their business, or maybe your objective is not to scale your business. Maybe your objective is to reduce the number of working hours that you do to three days a week, and you want to go play golf 2 days a week. That is also a very, very virtuous business outcome, because still those 3 days a week, you're providing peace of mind to your clients. But what I would say is going to separate them is actually how they use AI and where they use AI. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever gone on the OpenAI website, or last 2 weeks ago, Anthropic released a video, why does AI hallucinate? And I think what people need to understand is that when they use AI within their business, they should always verify. Humans get incredibly lazy when it comes to new technology. For example, I've seen people kind of produce documents and not read it, and it just sounds like AI slop, and you're just like, you can't put this in front of anyone. How are you doing that? And it's the same here, but it's obviously much more magnified because we're a heavily regulated business. So if you've got AI suitability reports, or if you've got AI XYZ document going out to clients, the verification process is a part of the process before that maybe advisors wouldn't spend a huge amount of time on if they had a power planner they could trust to write the report. Now, if AI is doing the majority of the writing and power planners are checking it and sending it onto the advisor, or even differently, the AI is drafting the report and advisor checking it, they do have to allocate more time to that checking process than probably what they would have done. And so the way we think about it is, you actually want AI to be used at certain places, but because we're a regulated industry, you want more logic-driven, deterministic decision-making in other areas. For example, suitability being one of them. I don't want an AI to make a decision, back to your earlier question, about whether this investment is suitable for a client, which is inherently what's happening when you kind of get an AI to draft a suitability report. I want me as a firm to be able to control at what points, what thresholds do I classify client vulnerable, at what points do I recommend that they go outside of their risk threshold to be able to invest in a different product or not. These are all kind of nuanced decisions, but ultimately I want to be able to not have a black box make those decisions. I want to be able to determine where those decisions came from. So I would say the difference between firms that will thrive and will fall behind is not necessarily those that won't use AI. It's those that will use AI responsibly versus those that won't. Using AI responsibly means it can do so much stuff that we previously have not done because it was too expensive or took too much time, that a human being now has the possibility just by typing a few things into their chat window to be able to do. But the things that we've done before, i.e. the classic fact find, suitability report, compliance check, is not something that you want to leave to chance. It's something that you want to be 100% certain about. And I would say the firms that understand that will be the ones that go very far.
Saturn have had a fantastic capital raise, which
Congratulations,
happened relatively recently in our world, but probably in the AI world, with the pace that things move, probably old.
Yeah, it feels like last year. It was last year.
How did you approach that? Being a young man with imposter syndrome, different things like that, going into a room full of board of investors who are potentially looking to buy into the business, it must have been daunting. How did you keep and maintain your confidence through that process?
I guess it's a few different things. For us, we believe a lot in the mission, and I think that's what investors are buying into. So I think the passion that comes across here or in other places where we talk about the mission, that's also the same passion that we had with investors. I think as a business, we've grown very well. We've got 700 firms on the platform, 9,000 advisors on the platform. The way we look at it is, we're doing a decent job from a market penetration perspective. We could do certain things better. We could be more human-led in terms of the experience we provide. We could be much more communicative and bring people on the journey, which we've got a community for, and we spend a lot of time and effort on our community. there's always things to improve in any business. And that kind of honesty and transparency when you go into a room full of people who are judging you, it kind of takes the air out of the balloon in some respects. It kind of ensures that they understand who they're working with, who they're dealing with. And that honesty is something that we will always work with. I think honesty builds a lot of trust. We're not trying to paint a picture of kind of rainbows and flowers to investors. You would tell the truth, just as we do to clients, just as we do to our team. I think ultimately there's a truth that is, if you're running a business, you need to be honest with people around you and people who you work with, because if you're honest, you're going to invite the right type of energy to come into the business as well. And I think from our perspective, it's always been about that. So yes, daunting, incredibly exciting once we kind of penned the raise, once we kind of got it signed and stuff like that. It was like 3 a.m, but it was, it just felt like a kind of boost, but it didn't change the way we operated. Ultimately, we are still young men who founded a business in financial advice to do things differently. We want to do things differently. We want to listen to advisors. We want to think about the end client when we build technology. How is this going to help the end client get better advice? And that's not changed since the beginning. We were scrappy boys on a sofa. Now we've got a nice office. So the environment's changed, but the way we show up every day, our principles, the way we speak to our clients, none of it's changed. And it will never change. And the day that it changes, we'll stop being Saturn. We'll start being a business that is built in the image of someone else. And so I think that's the most important thing.
Must have been a great vote of confidence.
Yes. I actually... Not the biggest, actually. So I think the biggest vote of confidence was when the first client signs. Really? And you get the DocuSign notification. You're like, this is something.
Proof of concept.
Proof of concept.
It goes from proof of concept to reality, and then you see the first money come into the bank account. And you're like, okay, we've started on the train. Now we need to kind of keep putting the coal into the train and keep going. And I think that energy that we show up with every day, to everyone, is something that will always be there. I think there's been moments of difficulty, moments of incredible happiness. Like, you just have to show up with the same energy. I'm a big football fan, and Pep is one of my favorite managers. Like, in terms of a leader, he is an incredible communicator. He talks about, guys, it doesn't matter what you did last year. Ultimately, we start from zero. And body language is the most important thing. And I think that's just, it's a principle, but it's a truth. It's a deep truth that if you show up to work, or if you show up and you get up in the morning and you have a spring in your step and you kind of put more energy into it, you'll get much more out of the day. You get much more out of that client meeting, much more out of the relationship. And so that's what we want to do.
It's an amazing story, isn't it? And I can tell it's only the start. You know, that funding round is rocket fuel for you. In the last 3 years, what's the biggest surprise of founder life, of a business that, we talked about your previous ventures, in this one that has really done well, up to now. What's the biggest surprise?
I didn't get smarter between now and the last businesses. In fact, I'm 31, so I think now I'm across the 30 timeline. IQ starts to drop, so I'm going to get more stupid over the years. But I think the thing that's most surprising is how important energy is and how unimportant intelligence is. Maybe...
Thank God for that.
Like, you've had Paul on the podcast, for example, obviously a smart man, but the most interesting aspect about Paul is his energy. He's experienced, but he still has the tenacity, the resilience, the persistence to show up every day and be the first into the office, the last out the office. Energy is not something that I gave a huge amount of thought to in the previous companies that I tried. I thought it was all brains, and I was like, why am I so stupid that this isn't working? Instead, it's about energy. It's about how you show up. It's about that. You can give that to the team. As a founder, there's probably 2 things that you're always going to be better at than your team. There's only 2. One is the mission, and having a passion for the mission. And the second is the energy that you bring. You're not going to be smarter. You're not going to be the best salesperson. You're not going to be the best engineer. You're not going to be the best product person. But you can be the most passionate for the mission and the most energetic. And I think if you do that, you'll end up hiring great people, and great people will want to work with you. And you'll also ensure that they have the fuel that they need to be the best people that they can be. And that's probably the most surprising thing.
Yeah, it rubs off on others as well, doesn't it? It's contagious. We've seen it through our business, haven't we? We've got towards the end there. So one piece of advice. If there are financial advisors who are out there, they've not taken the step into AI, where would you get them to start the journey? What would you get them to look at first?
I think I'd get them to I'm sure there's very, very few people in the world who have not gone to ChatGPT or not gone to Claude. I think they've probably gone there and maybe got scared, or they've gone there and typed in the wrong prompt and then it's given them a really rubbish answer. As I said earlier, I think what I would recommend is, if you don't feel confident, you should speak to someone who is confident and understand what their journey was. I'm generally more skeptical than most about new technology and about the pace of change. I think the pace of change has been astronomically quick, but there are people who said we already have AGI, or we had AGI last year and we're going to have AGI in 2027. I'm not one of those people. I think we already have a technology capable of revolutionizing the way that we work together. Mm-hmm. Why are we not using it?
Yeah.
And I think for businesses or business owners or advisors or people within financial advice who haven't yet tried, I promise you, this is a technology that can change the way that you collaborate with other human beings, your clients included. And I think it's just about kind of persisting with the technology today. I think even if no other AI was developed from now forwards, the technology that we have, it would take us probably 5 to 10 years to figure out exactly how to use it and where to use it. Right. So imagine the pace of change. Like, I look at the Industrial Revolution, when we started to produce electricity, it took 90 years for us to figure out how to use electricity in lights, in factories, in all of these areas. In fact, before, the people who were making the most money were people producing electricity, but it wasn't being used for anything. It was the people who were making the wires and people who were building the factories. But actually, we're moving much faster now. It's not going to take 90 years. It may take 5 to 10 years for businesses to actually figure out and capture all of the gains that AI enables, or capture some of the gains, a meaningful amount. And so I would get started as soon as possible. And I wouldn't expect it to change the world for you. As much as we talk about revolution, I'd just start with one thing and say, okay, before this used to take me 2 hours, let's see, with the help of AI, what it can now take me. And that could be a number of different things. But I would recommend picking one thing, using the different tools that exist to try and solve it, or to reduce the amount of time it takes. And if it works, then you're on the train. And if it doesn't work, try a different use case, because it definitely will work for something.
I think we always forget that nowadays. Just before we finish off this, everything moves so quick that we forget that things take time. And so it's always what's new. Yeah. What can we do differently today? Yeah. So I really love that last message, Rohit, that things take time. It's going to be quicker than last time. Yeah. Quicker than the Industrial Revolution. But, take that first step.
Exactly. I completely agree.
Rohit, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us. It's been great to have you on.
Thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate it.
No worries.